Hey Avinash, thanks so much for joining us today. Welcome to 24 Hours of Chaos. Super excited about what you're going to be presenting today. I've been following your work for a long time.
Thank you, Karan. Thanks, Aman. Nice to meet you guys, and thanks for having me here and thinking our project worthy of such an amazing forum. I'll just kind of get right into it. Just in the interest of time, I've put together a bunch of visuals and sounds from our project, and hopefully it'll be entertaining for people around the world to see what we're doing in India right now. So just really quickly, Antarik Studio is essentially a transmedia storytelling collective based out of India. And we focus on video games, performances, and media arts. And across all of these outcomes, a big focus for us is Indian culture and heritage. Um, so uh, just kind of from a very top view, there are two projects that our studio is working on right now, which is taking up most of our time. They both built finally for being used inside and through a game engine. But of course, the way we're going about it is a bigger world that's finally coming into the game engine. And part of the talk today is also to focus on that. One project is called Antara, which is a historical colonial Indian adventure where music and dance is a big part of the gameplay. And elsewhere in India is a live performance as well as an interactive art project where we're trying to explore the future world of Antara itself. Both the projects are really trying to demonstrate our commitment to make games from India that amplify our multicultural heritage. And just a quick note to some people who've been supporting us along the way, we're currently supported by the EPIC Mega Grant program since 2021. And we're also supported by the British Council India UK Together Season of Culture that celebrates 75 years of Indian independence. I think one of the things I'd like to say about the kind of vertical slice that we're working on, and I'll tell you more about the studio as we go along as well, which is called Antara, is that from several years now, I think our dream has been to create what one might call an independent AAA experiment. And here I'm just riffing off an iconic talk by Tamim Antonida from Ninja Theory. And this is a talk from GDC 2015 called an independent AAA experiment. And that really inspired me and our team to think about where we want to position ourselves. And I think the word independent is extremely important coming from India, where the gaming scene is obviously extremely influenced by investors. We felt like being independent is a very key aspect of what we're trying to do. And we've successfully managed to be independent for about 10 years now. It's our 10th year. And I wanted to therefore start with Jayalakshmi Ishwar, who's the other co-founder. She's also my mother. I've been very fortunate to be growing up in a family where Indian music and classical dance was a very important part. She's an accomplished dancer and author. The images on the right are 4 of her 6 books that she's written. And she basically came up with a story in 2010, which I was working on when I was a visual jockey. And that story somehow ended up becoming the start of a long video game adventure. And I think the point here is also to think about challenging the norms of video game authorship. I think this is a huge and important part of what's being spoken about globally. And I feel we're quite fortunate in India that we have so many points in Indian culture that one could work on. So what you see here is the original performance in 2010, which was a dance performance about aircrafts in Indian mythology, and the flyer on the right is something I'd made for my mom back then. And this kind of interest in connecting the dance of Bharatanatyam and Indian culture to science fiction, in some sense, was triggered our work in the project. So taking that as a cue and with a little bit of a seed grant from an organization called the HRC and the British Council in the UK, and with a majority of this process being self-funded, we've spent 4 years doing kind of a R&D slash prototyping. So this is Antarik Sanchar episode 0, as we called it back then.
Awesome.
Yes.
ತಜಣುದೀಂ ತಜಣುದೀಂ ತನತೀರನ.
Basically, essentially, like I said, a 45-minute game. It was we were borrowing from back then, like games like Kentucky Route Zero, Machinarium were very popular. Like the point and click genre was coming back and was doing very successfully in the indie scene. So our idea here was to combine, I guess, a more traditional point and click experience, but in this kind of a floating 3D world where the cameras move around, you go between first person, third person, and it's kind of like an art house, like an Indian Malgudi days science fiction kind of a thing with slow kind of movements and a lot of music and these kind of steampunk instruments and so on. I'm just going to play you a small video from what finally also became a new dance performance where we explored a more modern narrative. So this kind of clip shows you a clip from like the future, from a future Indian Mars mission, and where they find on Mars a small habitat that belongs to an Indian family. And that kind of kicks off this journey. And also important to mention, the person you see on the screen here is also inspired by he's the main protagonist, inspired by the great Indian mathematician Srinivasa Ramanujan. And the story of our character takes his kind of philosophy ahead.
In these troubling times, when countries and societies are fighting for the geopolitical conquest of Mars, the solar system, and the entire universe indeed, it is important to recount an alternative view of space travel, one that is but a pilgrimage through the beauty of the universe, carried forth with humility and wonder.
Some of these visuals then finally took us to Red Bull Music met us in 2018, and they helped us convert the video game that we built back into a dance performance with visuals from the game engine and from just other like motion graphic software that we were working on, and bring it all into a new show, which you see these pictures of, which again was super exciting because it kind of came back a full circle. And then from this story and what we did, we basically embarked on a totally different mission, which was to build a 2D game which was a totally radical departure from what we were trying. But this is a snippet from a 2D game working on mobile, again built on a game engine, and trying to create more like something like a learning tool where you can learn about. So in this case, you're playing with these two automatons. There, one is playing a Shruti box, one is playing, which is a sort of a drone instrument from India. And then you learn about musical theories, you learn about music, and also you get a chance to, create a rich environment, which, as you know, a lot of us who will be watching this talk would know, to create a detailed Indian environment in 3D is not a small feat, and it requires a whole lot of like different kinds of like inputs. And we felt at that point, our theory was that maybe by going 2D, we could overcome some of that and work with great 2D artists and bring that richness and flavor, which like the same artifact, for example, what you see on screen might be a very, very different technical issue to kind of bring back into like a real-time 3D environment. So this was kind of an interesting journey. But again, once we did that, we also realized that our true love and my own passion and stuff is in the 3D world. I think I definitely felt like I like the immersion and I like the kind of like environment and the tools. And it was just super exciting where the industry was going as a whole. So we basically then hunkered back right in like the middle of the pandemic. Basically, we started work on Antara, which is a rhythmic adventure through a techno-spiritual colonial India. And it's a third-person dance action adventure game, and you're trying to essentially outwit the colonizers on these different spaces around this kind of fantasy India. And you're trying to unlock these flying machines, which in some sense is the kind of short form of what's going on. And in terms of the pillars of what we're building right now as a kind of a game, one pillar is obviously rich Indian culture and mythology. Some of the stuff you see here, like the elephant, for example, is an interesting one that's inspired by our research on Indian bronze sculptures from the 15th and 16th century, and then trying to imagine that what if moving automatons were built by those sculptors in the 15th century, what it would be like. So these are again, this kind of science, what we're calling craft punk, basically, which is like our interpretation of steampunk for India. And the other visuals here as well show some of the work that's like in the game engine right now as we speak. The other pillar is that, again, going with the idea of like a non-violent game coming out of India and also trying to explore different kinds of like exciting mechanics and so on. We felt like a stealth adventure format would be a good format to go with. So the idea here is that you're a mother and son, you're walking through these different places, exploring heritage, and then you're working with the communities to create this kind of stealth experience in order to unlock what you need to. And finally, dance action and also music action is a big part of our game, and we're trying to see how traditional Indian motion capture can be used as a mechanic, because as some of you know, Indian dance is a very deep vocabulary in itself. It's a language in itself. So the idea is to see how we can convert that language, and also the language of classical Carnatic music, instruments, music theory, take all of that and convert it into let's say if Uncharted Lost Legacy was a musical adventure game. In some sense, it's trying to like find that. And in terms of positioning, it's interesting because I never actually tried to, all this while in this journey, I never really cared too much about what kind of game are we trying to build. I felt like it wasn't so important for me. But in recent times, as we try to explain what we're doing, we felt like trying to position ourselves is useful for gamers to understand. So in some sense, we are, looking at some elements of Uncharted Lost Legacy in terms of, combination of adventure and culture, some of the non-combat stealth mechanics it might be there in Beyond Good and Evil, definitely the music action and the dance action of Bound and Guitar Hero. So somewhere in the middle of all of this is hopefully like a sweet spot for us. One thing I just wanted to add was that we have a great interest in including non-traditional creators. I think being in India, we have access to and also a responsibility more than the access to include people like Rajiv, who's shown here, who's a painter, a street painter, and these are concept cards that he's painted for us, about 20 of them. And there are many, many examples like this. And what we're trying to, I guess, theorize on as a theory of our work and is this idea around a circular design for Indian video games. And when I mean circular, for example, what you see on screen is, sorry, his head's being blocked maybe, but the idea here is to show how you can create a digital fair trade provocation, or let's say an ethical photogrammetry pipeline where creators like a sculptor can be included in the whole process instead of just shooting like places you find and so on. Growing up in India, we know how rich everything is. We know that inside any shop in a small marketplace, there can be some magic happening. There can be some unbelievable character sitting on the street, who you think is an insignificant person, but that person can be like the most amazing person in the way they look, in the way they talk, right? So I think, but this is also the challenge, right? Being an Indian, India. So how do you make it on an indie budget, right? How do you make a AAA India on an indie budget? And also as a fundraising tactic, I mean, I know that we need to start selling our own things to make money for the project where we are. So, I mean, this is the unfortunate decision, but I think it's a good one. So we're hopefully, by the time a vertical slice gets around, we'll be launching our digital heritage storefront on the various marketplaces with about 100 objects.
Awesome.
We're kind of definitely exploring photogrammetry in a big way. This is just from a slightly semi-automated museum setup with a turntable and fairly not unprofessional, but less professional, let's say. We view photogrammetry as much as a research tool, as much as a production tool. I mean, there's obviously an aspect of heritage conservation, cultural conservation, preservation, creating assets for other people to research. I mean, all of this stuff is where we're also interested in. So that hopefully gives you some sense of the work we're doing. And then coming on to, like, obviously some of the character work I wanted to share is also trying to make use of the current technology in kind of next gen character creation. One of the challenges and the huge challenges with Indian garments and costumes is obviously that Indian costumes are super complicated to make. For example, if you look at this, which is a Bharatanatyam costume, while the challenge of animating this in a non-real-time environment is already would be high, the challenges of making this a real-time cloth, which pleats, let's say in this case, as a costume, which go with where the pleats open up and shut, and many other forms of like draping in Indian garments occur. It requires a very, very complicated workflow, in some sense beyond the scope of our current team, but we're just about going to make it manage. And we've figured out a lot of hacks, a lot of things along the way, working between softwares like Maya, 3D Studio Max, Unreal Engine, and Houdini to figure out a kind of a combined workflow to create garments which are kind of more true to the Indian way of dressing. And also, again, going back to just costumes, just Indian garments, Indian ways of wearing shirts, Indian ways of tying certain garments. This is the level at which we're trying to work, and we believe this kind of work will and research is extremely important if an Indian game has to be on the Indian global AAA market. We feel like these are the kind of details that will help us be authentic. Also exploring a lot of mythological animals, quadrupeds. Again, more challenges for the team, but super exciting nevertheless. And in terms of this is what the characters look like. So this is Ramanujan. So this is a custom character using some of the new pipelines going between Maya and Unreal Engine. We've not yet. We're still working on like the custom hair, especially for the dancer. Again, super complicated. Anyone out there wants to work with us or help, please do write to us. And this is the mother. And again, it's just extremely exciting to see people around us in this resolution. This is the the player controller that we're working on. Again, very complicated just to get like a complex player controller. You can see the cloth is still tearing on the boy's legs and so on. But still a long way from where we started. And this is now in-game character controllers. We have a character swapping mechanic where you can be the boy and you can be the mother. And then together you can solve some puzzles. And this is the more recent one where we're working with Houdini. And this is essentially working between Houdini and the game engine. And looking at real-time cloth sim.
Yeah.
As well as, like cloth grading, like size variations for all the NPCs, all of that stuff we're trying to drive from Houdini so that as a smaller team, we can work in a much more efficient manner. And this is some of the work that's going on right now, which could be interesting for you to look at just from this is literally like yesterday, day before. Just to give you where our character's going, the quality we're going for. And obviously all of this has to make its way back into the game engine from here. In terms of just like, I think an important part here is also that while we're working on digital humans, a big part of it is how do you link digital humans back to humanity? So a big part of our talent ecosystem is working with grassroots musicians, with dancers, dance students. So this is a little bit of the mocap stuff going on. This is on a body rig that was still in the early clunky metahuman days. So it's kind of all over the place a bit, but you can see a bit of what we're trying to do, which is working with and trying to capture the dance expressions on the bottom left. And the mocap on the right. And also it's been interesting working through the pandemic, working on Skype, Bangalore sessions, mocap, dancer sitting in Delhi, me sitting in Goa. It's like this insane trying to work like this. And also trying to work on like Houdini to clean up again. As a small team, we don't have the luxuries of a bigger team to do finger mocap corrections, body mocap corrections. Trying to work on an automated batch processing kind of a possibility of working between Xsense and Houdini and Unreal Engine to help us out a little bit along the way. And then, yeah, this is some of what this is like real time using faceware. And again, this is not calibrated. It's literally a first step. But the bottom left is interesting because that's basically that's a Skype call going on with my mother. and we're just taking the Skype call and going directly into faceware and then into the game engine.
This is crazy.
Yeah, so it's not corrected. That's why, I mean, obviously for the professionals looking at this, they will be horrified looking at this just in the quality of the facial mocap. But in all fairness, we're still tinkering around. It's just like literally in process work that I wanted to share. But again, there's just, there's just so much. There are so many parts of this pipeline. You just got to do what you can, along the way. And finally, for the sound design and production, we've taken the effort to really work like a AAA studio. One of the beautiful talks in GDC is the music of Doom, I think, and just like an insane work process. And we've tried to bring that same rigor to the music, because we also noticed that in India, especially, music often takes a backseat. It's the last thing that you just get done in a hurry. And for us, it's a very core important part of creating the mood, creating the experience, and working with real musicians. We worked with about 40 plus instrumentalists in South India right now for this project. And finally, just to give you a quick sense of how some of it is coming together, this is just one of the maybe scenes that's not the most current scene, which I'm not able to share right away, but maybe from a couple of months back, just giving you a sense of how, and of course, this is not our character. This is the character Echo, which is just a more smooth character back then before we figured out a player controller. You can see some of the soldiers. We've been programming some of the simple AI and all of that stuff right now, looking at some of the stealth mechanisms. And then kind of like, essentially this is like a marketplace that you're exploring. And this is like a simple game kind of this keynote is awful for playing videos. Yeah. Now it won't play. But yeah, basically this is like some of the world. This is like a small puzzle where you have to collect like sound particles that are coming from the top, and there's this machine that plays all these Indian classical instruments like a mridangam on the left. It's kind of like essentially a automaton kind of sculpture. And then yeah, this is another one of the scenes that we're working on. Let me just play it on. I don't know why it's not playing properly. Let's see it better. So this is one of the scenes that we're working on. Again, this is not final by any stretch, but it gives you a sense of the kind of world we're trying to build. A lot of stuff has to come in. It's all like just prototype level things. Yeah, I mean, this is kind of like what I had to share. Maybe I'm going to pause here in the interest of time as well. I'm not sure how much time we've taken up, but hopefully that gives you some kind of an idea around what our project's about.